Okay, welcome to showcase number 96, I think. We're going to go through today pretty quickly because today was my celebration of part of Christmas, and obviously everything is really busy around Christmas in general, so it's a little hard to do a longer showcase, but that doesn't mean we have any lack of stuff to show off, and there's plenty to go over, so I'm going to do that just more quickly than usual, and I might kind of skimp on some of the editing to save some amount of time. Regardless, like I said, not too much time, so we're just going to jump right into what I have to show off. The most obvious thing on screen right now is probably the trees and the rocks, and that's fairly clear to anyone who's watching, but one thing that I wanted to show off in particular here is something related to procedural generation, and that probably sounds pretty fancy if you don't know what that is or if you don't follow development of games very much, but just to give you a very basic rundown, Minecraft, Terraria, etc., any game that procedurally generates its terrain or whatever else, that's procedural generation. And we aren't going to be making huge use of that, and pardon the lag here, OBS really doesn't like when I have a lot of objects on screen, and mind this too, it's obviously overlapping here, but that won't be the case in the future. Anyway, one thing to note here is obviously that you see these pathways, and the reason that I'm showing this off, if we aren't even going to be using procedural generation very much, is because the plan is to have a grid of custom-made maps by mappers and myself and whoever else decides to help out with maps. And those will be hand-placed, hand-picked maps with cities and stuff like that that evolve over time that we specifically custom make. Now what you're seeing here is all automatically generated. The reason I'm even showing this off right now is because of the fact that it's all automatically generated. And like I said, we aren't going to be making a ton of use of this, but in the future, what I would like to do is surround those custom-made maps with maps like this that are automatically generated, meaning I can technically speaking have an infinite kind of progressing terrain, even if literally speaking it isn't infinite. You know, it's just kind of faking an infinity. And then as you progress further and out, it'll make it more difficult and more difficult to get ore and to go further out just by itself, because not just tree density but NPC density and stuff like that will increase as you progress further away from the center of the map, if that makes sense. And what you're seeing right now is, like I said, an emphasis of, or I guess instance of procedural generation. We have a couple layers of noise creating these cool patterns. Obviously it's a little too many trees. They're kind of really dense right now, but that's something that can be easily adjusted. And I just wanted to go ahead and show it off because I think it's kind of cool looking. I'm currently using one of the maps that we were using before. Like I said, it's a background, so it's kind of, that's why it's being overlaid with all these trees, but whatever the case, I still think it looks pretty cool even with that considered. Again, apologies for the lag, OBS really dislikes this area in particular, but you can see that, like right here even is a pretty cool area, and this is completely, again, procedurally generated. I haven't touched this map. If I reloaded this map right now, it would start a different seed and it would come up with a different pattern of trees. And obviously that's not always preferable, but it also helps mappers because I can save these maps if I so choose, with some little modifications here and there to the code. And then those mappers can then modify this map. If they like this piece of the area, for instance, and they don't like this piece up here, or maybe that doesn't work or doesn't connect to anything, then they can just chop that piece out. It's no big deal. You can see, again, some weirdness down here. This is just tall grass, but whatever the case, I think we're good. Oh, no, actually, we have a couple more things to show off here that I can do before we skip to another clip. The first of note, I guess, is these hotbar icons down here. So, a while ago, we got the hotbar redone, as most of you guys probably know, maybe. You might have seen it. And the reason that we did that is because, I mean, I liked Doom's art. Doom's the artist that did the hotbar, but it just didn't really fit the chat style as much. So I had Howell, who was our main artist that did a lot of the art for spells, the hotbar obviously, and then the chat and a bunch of other stuff. I had him redo the hotbar, and I also had him redo all of these icons that were previously my own creations, and now they fit very well, at least in my opinion, and we have 10 of them total now instead of 8. So we have stats. This is your stat and inventory menu. This is your spell tree menu, masteries. This is crafting. This is the RP button, obviously that overlays, but as intended. You have your engagements menu. I don't have a target, so I wouldn't do anything right now. And then obviously, here down for the last 4 slots, we either have nothing or the RP button. That's just because I haven't fully coded those buttons yet, so they'll come in the future. But I believe we have a help button, so that's kind of self-explanatory. An admin ticket button, so that helps you open tickets with admins, and it's basically the admin help verb if you know that. We have a config option, and one other that I can't put my finger on right now. So that's all there. It's mainly just an aesthetic thing, but I think it works really, well together. It's very pleasing to the eye. And I believe the other thing we have to go over is weapon skills. Yeah. So weapon skills currently don't have new art just yet. Some of them do, some of them don't, but none of them have it implemented. So I've had Doom working on some FX for the weapon skills recently, and he's been doing a really great job with those. I really am super pleased with him, and I think you guys will be too. But for right now, they are vacant. We don't have them installed with these specific spells, and some of the spells are a little bit wonky still, but I've been working on making them complete. So for any of you that had played the playtest server, it's obviously a minority of people, but they would know that when you clicked on these before, it would just throw an error and say you can't touch that, it's not finished yet. Or not an error, but it would, say that to your screen, and you wouldn't be able to enter the spell tree menu. So that's been changed. All of these spells, except for weapon training here in the center, have been implemented, so you don't have to worry about them freaking out on you. And moreover, most of them have been quote-unquote balanced, at least in function. I haven't really touched the numbers very much yet, as is the case with most of the hybrid trees. They're still a little wonky, but I've been working on that, obviously. And you can see that most of these have updated descriptions too, so they don't freak out when you click on them, except for swords, obviously. I believe Executioner's Ring? Yeah, Executioner's Ring exists, but Rend and Strike here, Rend here and Strike here respectively, don't exist, which is why it freaks out. So if you try to click a spell button that doesn't have a spell attached, it freaks out. Logically speaking, I should probably add an exception for that, so that it doesn't throw an error, but also at the same time I shouldn't be adding empty spell buttons to the spell tree in the future, so, it's not that big a deal. Oops, that was weird. Anyway, so we have Lunge, Blinding Jabs, Sky Shatter, Arrow Shot, Seeking Bolt, and Heart Piercer, and then this is going to be Strike, Rend, and Executioner's Ring. And all of those are going to be accessible only if you are using that weapon. So you won't be able to, for instance, use the spear spells if you have a sword equipped, and you won't be able to use this sword spells if you have a spear equipped. I think that's what I just said. Whatever. Anyway, you get the idea. You can't use the spells of the weapon branch, I guess, unless you have the corresponding weapon equipped. That goes for mage weapons too, so you can't use sword spells if you have a tome equipped or whatever else. However, you can buy as many as you want, so you can have all of the spells listed here if you wanted to for some reason. It wouldn't really benefit you that much because you couldn't use them at the same time, but if you wanted to be some sort of weapon master that can switch between them per verb, or per engagement, sorry, then you absolutely can. There's not really anything holding you back. So, that's that. I think racials have had a similar sort of treatment. These spells down here, currently this is not overlaying properly, so you aren't going to be able to see this, but, oh, I guess it is, okay. So the heart spells just don't currently overlay, but whatever the case, pretty basic stuff to go over here. The only thing I should mention is that this isn't a spell yet, and I'm probably going to remove it for now, so we just have 8 racials, and I think that should be fine. They're all pretty strong right now, and the heart spells themselves are really good, so I don't necessarily need to give that much more to the races. I think that it'll be fine, but just, to go to kind of briefly glimpse at them, we have Mercurial Melody again. I showed these off already, but Stand Tall for Vian, Mercurial Melody for Hyson, Shield of the Lurker for Esh, and lastly for Ith we have Favorable Winds. And all of those I'll probably go over in a single video all at the same time, probably maybe in a guide kind of thing, but whatever the case. The 4 heart spells are identical in function. They plug now directly into your affinity calculations, so if you are a Vian and you have Heart of the Sun, which obviously doesn't show up here because it doesn't exist yet, I guess. But it should, but basically I have the system for accepting the spell set up, but the spell itself doesn't exist yet, if that makes sense. Anyway, that's set up so that when you have that spell in your list of spells, your affinity, you get 15% more value out of it. So if you have 10 affinity, you effectively have 11.5, if that makes sense. It sounds kind of, whatever, but you have to keep in mind that it caps at 10, and the cost of that in stat points is huge. It's about 40 or 50, so getting an extra 1.5 on top of that is massive. It's really important, and that's just implicit too. So if you somehow got 20 affinity, even though that's not going to be possible, then it scales with that too. Whatever the case, I guess I should also mention that if you get like the essence buff, for instance, which overcharge, which allows you to stack up essence affinity, then this would apply over that as well. It literally gives you flat 15% more value over all affinity, if that makes any sense. But I think that that's good for this. There's one more thing that I want to go over today, and that's going to be a really complicated thing. So if you aren't a super big fan of the kind of complicated mechanical stuff, you can check out. Not a big deal. But I've been working on something of a pet project for the past couple days, and I wanted to show some of that stuff off. So again, kind of a mechanical thing, kind of a convoluted thing. If you're not into that, feel free to check out. Again, if you're not, stick around. I think you might find it interesting. It's inverse kinematics, which you might find fun. I think it's really fun, and I find the fun things that I make with it to be pretty cute, to be honest. But whatever the case, I'll see you in a second. Okay, so for this clip we're going to do something sort of short, or at least I'm going to try to keep it short, and what you're seeing on the screen right now probably looks really creepy. I've been told that it looks like a spider, and that's kind of intentional, I guess. It also looks like a million different things, and will probably make people hate it. But first of all, before you hate it because it looks like a spider, hear me out. Inverse kinematics is extremely important. So if you don't know what it is, basically you're taking, say, your hand and putting it at a place and then doing all of the calculations to make your arm follow your hand and make it look visually, appropriate, right? You want it to look correct, you want it to look like it's following, and it's used everywhere in game coding, in game development, I guess. So if you have a player model, normally if they're just standing on uneven terrain, one of their feet will hover above the ground. So you can use inverse kinematics to make their leg touch the ground, and the rest of their body will just kind of automatically decide how it should stand to make that look natural. So normally that sounds whatever, right? Not really useful for verdict. However, the functions and applications of this are limitless. IK is genuinely one of the biggest developments of the past, how many years since it's been developed. It's sincerely super important, and I wanted to show that off. So first of all, we got the spider, and you're probably going to say this spider looks terrible, I hate it, and you're not really wrong. It is pretty terrifying. But if you've ever played Rain World, this functions similarly to Daddy Longlegs, which is a mob there, as well as some of the other mobs. They're literally just inverse kinematics drones, and I've programmed in some other stuff here. So if I can walk off to the side, and if I click somewhere on the screen, you can't see my cursor, but you can see that it makes one of the legs of the spider follow the mouse. So it's a little choppy. That's primarily just me being lazy in how I coded it. Sincerely, it's not the functionality of the system itself. But if I were to click again, it won't grab the same arm. I can grab as many of the random arms as I want, and then they'll go back to doing their own thing in a second. You can also see here that I made it so that we can grab boxes, and they tend to float off. Regardless, that's another thing I'll show off in a second. You can see when I move, they're adjusting to grab onto things, and they realize when they can't, and then move to other things. They're fairly intelligent, I would say. And the floating thing is obviously a little wonky. I'm not really that great at making a physics engine, but it was just for testing, and you can see that as soon as I put it back down again, they start grabbing it. The whole point of this thing is to show off that inverse kinematics isn't just making a 3D model level with the ground. It's a lot of different stuff, and in particular, like games with Rain World, or rather with the game Rain World, and with some other games that maybe people don't realize as much, IK is super important, and it's really prevalent in those games. So I also grabbed some other GIFs of what I've been doing with this to show you guys exactly what it does and the purposes of it. And to give you a base rundown of what's happening here, I did the exact same thing I just showed you, except I pinned the limbs to certain spots in the world, and then I changed their icon with the recent chain icon that we got from Howl. So instead of looking like weird spider legs and spider limbs, we get these really intricately turning and curving and moving chain links instead. And the whole point of this is basically to replace the existing chain system I made, because I don't have to calculate all of the angles by hand. And I mean, I didn't really do that already, but you can see this does it fluidly. You can even see that when I move too far away, it snaps. It snaps tight. And when I'm too far, it doesn't stretch. It doesn't warp or contort. For the most part, the sprite quality here is maintained. It looks very good regardless of the fact that it's being contorted and twisted and moved around like this. You can also see the FPS. Even with, I think, 40 of these, something like that, I maintain pretty good FPS until I open up OBS. Otherwise, I would be showing it off. Regardless, I also pinned some in the world here, so you can see this in a GIF as well. The whole point of this was just to show off that I could, I guess, but as soon as you do it, it starts to look like a wave. So you could probably see, even if you didn't want to make a living creature, or even if you weren't modifying a 3D model of a person, you could make, physical elements of a world like waves or water or whatever else just using IK. So it's a really versatile tool, and I wanted to show that off and kind of, I guess, justify why I spent a day coding it and realizing how to do it and blah blah blah. This is also very similar to one of Rainworld's enemies, and again, that's not really me copying it, it's just that Rainworld made a pretty good use of IK, and it was one of the first games that I know of that just, frankly, kind of dumped the IK system into an enemy, and it turned out really good. It looks kind of creepy, it's just living enough looking to make you feel like it's AI, but it's really not. It's more of a, I wouldn't say it's AI, it's kind of just trig at work. So whatever the case, I think it's really cool, and I wanted to show you guys exactly what I was doing with it because, first of all, it just started with my intention to rework the chain system, and it kind of spiraled out of control from there. So you can see when it goes taut here, what I want to happen is I want to connect to people with a chain. So you cast this, and then it hits the enemy, and it connects them to that chain so they can't move beyond it. And that's relatively simple. I've already tested it enough. But just to give you guys a very, very quick show of exactly how this works and that I'm not screwing with you and it's not some sort of weird facade, I'm just going to drop down some of these obstacles here, and then we're going to load up the game, and I can show you very quickly that as soon as I walk down there, these things will start grabbing it or grabbing at the obstacles, and I'll be able to toss them around. So you can see they start pinning themselves to them, and as soon as they walk or I walk too far away, the arms will go for a new one, and they pick, and then they'll repick, and so on and so forth. I also did some logic here so that when I'm walking and I'm far away from these obstacles, they'll just pin to random locations in front of me, or sort of in front of me. It doesn't work super well, but it is what it is. I'm not super versed on this yet, but whatever the case, I think it looks really cool. And if you get to a point when they get all pinned to the same one, and you kind of whip it around a little bit, they tend to form into a single strand, which I think looks pretty cool too. Whatever the case, I thought that was really cool, and I wanted to share it with you guys, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be putting it in the showcase. And also, I might be implementing it as a sort of spider that walks across void islands. Maybe not a spider, I don't know. I've heard a bunch of stuff about people with arachnophobia and a bunch of other things like that, so I might not, but we'll see. It's going to be, at least spider-like, I guess, but I understand I really hate them too. So whatever the case, I just thought that was some stuff that you guys would enjoy hearing about. I know that some people really enjoy hearing about the deeper mechanics of some of the stuff I, show off sometimes, so I guess this wasn't really a code showcase, but it was still relatively nuanced. Regardless, I think we're good for today. I know it was really short relative to clip size and clip amount, but again, it was just, holidays are always really busy, and of course it's kind of difficult to make a million clips of, a couple different things that are relatively easy to show off. So anyway, I think that we're good for today, so I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys look forward to the next showcase, which of course is going to be on next Friday, after Christmas, which will ideally be a lot easier to make than this one was, for sure. And I hope you have a good day.